I am Evelyn Harper, 62 years old, and I have spent the better part of my life inside the walls of Sterling and Cole Finance. Numbers have been my language, spreadsheets my daily rhythm, balance sheets and ledgers the quiet companions of my long career. 35 years of showing up before the sun rose, staying long after the lights in the building dimmed, giving all of myself to a company that promised stability, loyalty, and dignity at the end of the road. For most of my life, I believed in that promise. I believed in the system. I believed in hard work. I started at Sterling and Cole when I was a young woman in my late 20s, fresh out of school, eager to prove myself. I worked through the long nights, the endless tax seasons, the crises that came and went. I sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, family dinners. I told myself it was worth it because one day when my hair turned gray and my hands began to tremble with age, I would walk away with a pension, with gratitude, with respect. That was the dream that kept me steady through all the storms. And now, only 3 days before my retirement became official, 3 days before the moment I had quietly counted down in my calendar for years, they took it all away. I can still remember that morning. The coffee was lukewarm, my desk piled high with invoices to be checked one last time. Rebecca, one of the younger accountants, leaned over and whispered with a smile, "Almost there, Evelyn. 3 more days and you're free." I laughed softly. "Yes, 3 more days," I said. I allowed myself to feel proud, to feel relief. But beneath the surface, there was always a shadow. I had noticed things, irregularities, numbers that did not add up, transfers that seemed to vanish into thin air. At first, I thought it was my tired eyes, my aging memory. But no, I knew the truth. I kept quiet for a while. Still, I held on to hope that I would make it through quietly, that I could leave in peace. I remember looking out the window that morning, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the pavement. The world looked so calm, so ordinary. And yet, deep inside, something stirred. A quiet voice that whispered, "This story would not end as simply as I had imagined." I had earned my retirement. I had earned the right to walk away with dignity. But Sterling and Cole saw me differently. To them, I was not a woman who had given her life to their success. I was just another number in their endless calculations, a liability. When you are 62, they do not see you as valuable anymore. They see you as expensive, disposable, replaceable. I close my eyes and I can still hear the voices in that cold conference room. Daniel Price, my manager, with his sharp suit and sharper smile. Clara Mitchell, the head of human resources, her hands folded neatly on the table as if she were presiding over a funeral. My funeral. Daniel leaned forward, his tone falsely sympathetic. "Evelyn, we appreciate everything you've done, but the company is restructuring. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." I stared at him in silence. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. 3 days, I whispered. I had 3 days left. Clara's eyes flickered, but she did not look away. "You'll receive a severance package if you sign these papers today," she said calmly, sliding the documents across the table. I looked down at the papers. My name was there, bold at the top. Evelyn Harper. 35 years condensed into a single line. Terminated. Inside, something cracked, but not the way they expected. I pushed the papers back slowly. "No," I said. Just one word, but it carried all the weight of the decades I had given them. They exchanged a glance, Daniel's jaw tightening, Clara's smile faltering. They thought I would be desperate, that I would surrender quietly. They thought they could erase me with the stroke of a pen. But I was not as weak as they imagined. I walked out of that room with trembling hands, but also with a fire I had not felt in years. A fire that told me this was not the end. This was the beginning. Because what they did not know, what they could not possibly imagine, was that I had been keeping records of my own. Files, documents, proof of the lies they had hidden for so long. I had seen the shell accounts, the manipulated ledgers, the millions shifted around like pieces on a chessboard. The summons came without warning. That morning had felt like any other. The quiet hum of computers in the office, the smell of stale coffee drifting through the air, the sound of footsteps on polished floors. I was finishing a report, carefully aligning the numbers, when a soft knock tapped against my desk. "Evelyn," Rebecca whispered, leaning close. "Daniel wants you in the conference room. Clara's there too." Her eyes flickered with something. Concern, maybe. Pity. I couldn't quite tell. I stood up slowly, my hands cold even though the air was warm. I gathered my notepad, though I knew I wouldn't need it, and made the long walk down the hall. Each step echoed in my ears. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, a sound I had heard for decades, but which now seemed to carry a new heaviness. The door to the conference room was half open. Inside, I could see Daniel Price seated at the far end of the table, his suit crisp, his tie perfectly knotted. Beside him sat Clara Mitchell, composed as always, her face a mask of polite professionalism. "Come in, Evelyn," Daniel said smoothly as I entered. His tone was practiced, the kind of voice he used when delivering bad news to clients. Controlled, even, distant. I sat down. The chair was cold against my back. My heart pounded as Clara slid a folder across the polished wood surface. She folded her hands neatly, looking almost serene. Daniel leaned forward, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn, we appreciate the many years you've given to Sterling and Cole. Truly, your dedication has not gone unnoticed." I nodded faintly, waiting. His words felt rehearsed, as if he had said them a dozen times before in front of other faces, other careers. Then his voice dropped slightly, soft but firm. "Unfortunately, the company is undergoing restructuring. Your position has been eliminated." The words fell like a stone into the silence of the room. Eliminated. I stared at him, unable to speak. My chest tightened, my breath caught halfway, leaving me suspended between disbelief and rage. 3 days. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I had 3 days left. Clara adjusted her glasses, her tone even and soothing, as if she were explaining something simple to a child. "We understand how difficult this must be, but we've prepared a severance package for you. If you sign today, you'll receive compensation immediately. It's all in here." She tapped the folder. I looked down at the papers, my name printed at the top, my future condensed into lines of cold legal language. 35 years, gone in the stroke of a pen. For a moment, I couldn't move. My throat burned, my eyes blurred. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to cry out that it wasn't fair. But instead, I sat in silence. I studied their faces. Daniel's jaw was tense, though his lips curved into that hollow smile. Clara's eyes avoided mine, fixed instead on the papers she pushed toward me. They wanted me to crumble. They wanted me to surrender. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the folder. Then I stopped. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed it back toward them. "No," I whispered. My voice was low but steady. Daniel blinked, as if he hadn't expected resistance. "Evelyn, I don't think you understand. This is the best option for you. Signing ensures you'll receive—" "I said no!" The room fell silent. Clara's expression flickered just for a moment before she masked it again. Daniel's smile hardened into something sharper. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, but also a strange clarity. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would fold, desperate for scraps after decades of loyalty. But I still had something they didn't know about. Inside me, fear tangled with fury. My heart was racing, but a new determination pulsed beneath it. I stood, Pushing the chair back gently, my hands trembled, but I held my head high. "You can keep your papers," I said softly. "I will not sign." Daniel's voice sharpened. "Evelyn, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at him directly for the first time, my voice clear and calm. "You already have." I turned and walked out of the room. Each step felt heavy, but also freeing. Behind me, the muffled sound of Clara's sigh, Daniel's muttered curse. They thought the matter was settled, that I was just another discarded employee who would vanish quietly. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the files I had kept, the evidence I carried, the truth that waited, buried in the numbers they thought no one would ever question. I returned to my desk, my colleagues glancing at me with curious eyes. Rebecca whispered, Are you okay?" I forced a small smile. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice trembled. More than fine. Inside, my heart still ached, raw and bruised. But beneath that ache, there was fire. They thought they had ended my story. But in truth, they had just written the first line of a very different one. This was the shock that broke me open. This was the moment the betrayal became real, and this was also the moment when I knew I would never forgive them, never forget, never let them win. And I had kept it all. They thought they were discarding an old woman, blind and powerless. But I was watching them all along. I walked back to my desk, past the rows of younger employees tapping on keyboards, oblivious to the storm brewing above their heads. I sat down, ran my fingers along the edge of my desk, and whispered to myself, "They took 3 days from me, but I will take everything from them." That was the moment, the exact moment, when the betrayal became more than just a wound. It became a purpose. I am Evelyn Harper, 62 years old, 35 years of loyalty erased in an instant. But I am not finished. Not yet. This is my story. Not of defeat, but of justice. And they will soon learn what it means to betray someone who has nothing left to lose. I drove home in silence that evening. The city moved around me as if nothing had changed. Traffic lights blinking, people rushing across the streets, laughter spilling out from a cafe. Yet inside me, the world had cracked. My chest felt tight, as though someone had pressed a heavy stone against my heart. Every breath stung. I gripped the steering wheel harder than I should have, knuckles pale, trying to hold myself together. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house stood waiting. Quiet, familiar. But I didn't feel the comfort I once knew. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the silence wrapped around me like a shroud. I sank into the old armchair in my living room, the one that had carried me through countless late nights, and for the first time all day, I let myself feel the wound. It hurt. It hurt in a way I hadn't expected. 35 years of loyalty, 35 years of sacrifice. And in the end, they had discarded me like I was nothing. My mind began to replay the years. The memories came, uninvited. The nights when I stayed at the office until midnight, eyes red from staring at columns of numbers, while my daughter Linda fell asleep without me there to tuck her in. The holidays I missed because the end-of-year reports couldn't wait. The times I told myself, just one more project, just one more season, and then I will rest. I remembered Linda's voice, so small back then. "Mom, are you coming home for dinner tonight?" And I had answered, without meeting her eyes, "Not tonight, sweetheart. I have to finish this report." The memory burned. They had taken those years from me. And now, when I had almost reached the finish line, they had taken the final reward too. Tears welled in my eyes, but I brushed them away quickly. I hated crying. I hated feeling weak. Sitting in that chair, I realized what Sterling and Cole had seen me as all along. A machine. A calculator that never complained. never stopped, never asked for more than a paycheck. They had used me until my gears began to slow, until I cost more than I produced, and then they threw me away. For a moment, the despair threatened to swallow me whole. The thought of being cheated out of my retirement, the years I had clung to as a promise, almost broke me. But then, another thought came. A spark. Faint, but steady. I remembered the files. Over the years, I had noticed things. Transfers that didn't belong. Balances that never reconciled. Money that seemed to disappear and reappear like ghosts. I had asked questions once, only to be brushed aside by Daniel with that polished smile of his. "Don't worry about it, Evelyn. Just clerical errors." But I was not blind. I had been in accounting too long to mistake fraud for mistakes, so I had started keeping copies. Quietly, carefully. A folder here, a backup there. At first, I told myself it was just precaution, just proof in case I ever needed to defend my work. But as the years passed, the evidence grew. Transactions that made no sense. Shell accounts hidden under obscure names. Ledgers manipulated to look clean when I knew they were anything but. I never spoke of it. Not even to Linda. Not even to Rebecca, though I saw in her eyes she sometimes suspected I knew more than I let on. And now, sitting in my living room, with the ache of betrayal heavy in my chest, I realized what I had. I whispered into the empty air. They thought I was just a machine, but I've been watching all along. The fire stirred again inside me. The wound was still raw. The memories still hurt. But the evidence I carried gave me strength. I was not powerless. I had something they could never take from me. The truth. I rose from the chair, walked to the study, and opened the drawer where I kept the old external drive. I held it in my hands, the metal cool against my skin. Inside this little box were the secrets of Sterling and Cole. Years of deceit, years of greed. I stared at it and felt a strange calm settle over me. "They tried to erase me," I whispered. "But now I will erase them." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the desk, papers spread before me, the faint glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. Memories of sacrifice pressed in, missed birthdays, empty chairs at Christmas dinners, the loneliness of long nights at the office. But now, those memories sharpened into fuel. The pain they caused me had turned into purpose. I was Evelyn Harper. They thought they could silence me with severance papers. But I had chosen a different path, and as the night wore on, as I sifted through years of stolen numbers and buried lies, one truth grew clearer than ever. This was no longer just about me. This was about justice, and I would not stop until they paid for what they had done. They thought I was broken. They thought I was just an old woman, frail, tired, too weak to fight back. But they were wrong. I had watched their lies take shape for years, watched numbers bend into shapes they were never meant to take. Hidden accounts, false reports, money that flowed like water into places no one was supposed to see. And I knew the truth cannot stay buried forever. I sat at my desk that night, staring at the evidence spread before me. Each paper, each file felt like a weapon they had placed in my hands without realizing it. The more I read, the stronger I felt. But strength alone was not enough. I needed someone who knew the law, someone I could trust. My thoughts turned to an old friend, Michael Torres. Michael and I had met decades ago, back when Sterling and Cole was smaller, back when people still believed the company stood for honesty. He had gone into corporate law while I stayed with the numbers. Life had pulled us in different directions, but I remembered him as steady, sharp, trustworthy. It was nearly midnight when I picked up the phone. My hands shook as I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Hello?" I hesitated. "Michael, it's Evelyn. Evelyn Harper." There was a pause. Then his tone softened. "Evelyn? It's been years. Are you all right?" I swallowed hard. "No, not really. I need your help." We met the next day at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one looked too closely, where conversations could disappear into the clatter of dishes and the hiss of frying pans. Michael slid into the booth across from me, his dark suit slightly wrinkled, his expression serious. "You sounded shaken last night," he said. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and opened the folder I had carried with me. Pages spilled out, filled with numbers, transactions, dates. My life's work, twisted into proof of their crimes. "This," I whispered, "is what Sterling and Cole has been hiding for years." Michael leaned forward, scanning the pages, his brow furrowed, his lips tightened. "Good God, Evelyn," he murmured. "This isn't just sloppy accounting. This is fraud. Serious fraud." "I know," I said. My voice was low, steady. "And now they've thrown me out. 3 days before my retirement. After everything I gave them." Michael looked up at me. His eyes held both anger and pity. "You can't keep this to yourself. You have enough here to bring them down." I hesitated. The weight of it pressed down on me. If I do this, they'll come after me. Daniel, Clara, the board, they won't stop. "Of course they'll come after you," Michael said quietly. "But you won't be alone. This is bigger than Sterling and Cole. This is securities fraud. You need to take this to the SEC." The words hung between us. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I had read their name 100 times in compliance documents, in articles about companies caught cheating the system. They were powerful, relentless. If I gave them this, Sterling and Cole would have nowhere to hide. I looked down at the folder, my fingers brushing the pages. Years of sacrifice, years of silence, and now, years of evidence. I whispered to myself more than to Michael. They thought I was powerless, but this is power. Michael nodded. "It is. But Evelyn, it will not be easy. They will fight. They will try to discredit you, intimidate you, even destroy your reputation. You need to be ready." I closed my eyes. I thought of Linda, my daughter. I thought of the nights I had missed, the birthdays I had skipped. I thought of the years I had given to a company that saw me as nothing more than numbers on a ledger. And then I thought of Daniel's smug smile, Clara's calm voice as she slid those papers toward me. I opened my eyes, fire burning in my chest. "I am ready," I said. "I won't let them erase me. Not like this." Michael exhaled slowly, as if he had been waiting for me to say those words. "Then I'll help you file. We'll get this into the right hands." That night, as I drove home, the air felt different. The pain was still there, sharp, aching, but beneath it pulsed something stronger. Resolve. I knew the road ahead would be long. I knew the fight would be brutal, but I also knew this. They had underestimated me, and I would not stop until the truth was out. I am Evelyn Harper, and I have decided. This is not the end of my story. This is only the beginning of theirs. The days that followed felt unreal, as if I were living 2 lives at once. On the surface, everything looked the same. I still walked into Sterling and Cole each morning carrying my worn leather bag, greeting the receptionist with a polite nod. I still poured myself a cup of bitter coffee in the break room, the same coffee I had sipped for decades. I still sat at my desk, shuffling through papers, checking numbers that no longer mattered to me. But inside, nothing was the same. Inside, a storm raged. because I knew what no one else in that building knew. The SEC had my files. They were digging, silently, patiently, into every corner of Sterling and Cole's empire. They were tracing the missing money, uncovering the shell companies, peeling back the polished veneer Daniel and Clara had so carefully painted. And while the investigation unfolded in secrecy, I had to keep living among the people I had betrayed. Every smile I gave was a lie. Every polite word was a mask. Rebecca would stop by my desk sometimes, her eyes searching mine. "Are you sure you're all right, Evelyn? You've seemed different." I forced a small laugh, waving her off. "I'm fine, Rebecca. Just tired. You know how it is." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. The truth pressed against my lips every day, begging to be spoken. But I held it back. No one could know. Not yet. At night, I lay awake in my bed, the shadows stretching across the ceiling. My chest would tighten with fear. Fear that Daniel might suspect. Fear that Clara's sharp eyes might pierce through my calm facade. Fear that someone would find the trail leading back to me before the SEC was ready. There were moments when the fear nearly broke me, when I wanted to retreat, to call Michael and tell him to withdraw the evidence, to burn the files, to let me fade quietly into the obscurity they had planned for me. But then, the anger would return. I would see Daniel's face in my mind, the smug curl of his lips as he told me my position was eliminated. I would hear Clara's calm, careful voice as she slid those papers toward me, as if my life could be erased with a single signature, and the fire inside me would flare. I whispered to myself in the darkness, "No, they will not erase me. They will not." The silence could not last forever. It never does. One morning, I stepped into the office and immediately felt it. An energy in the air that wasn't there before. The usual hum of keyboards was sharper, faster. Whispers darted between cubicles like nervous birds. Eyes flicked toward screens, then away again, as if people were staring at something too dangerous to linger on. Then I saw it. The headline glared from a news site open on Rebecca's monitor. Bold, merciless, impossible to ignore. SEC launches federal investigation into Sterling and Cole finance. For a heartbeat, I froze. The words lit up like fire. After all the secrecy, all the nights I spent whispering to myself in the dark, it had begun. I forced myself to move, to walk past without hesitation, my face calm, my body steady. But inside, my heart pounded with something fierce and unshakable. Around me, chaos erupted. Employees huddled in tight circles near the break room, voices dropping into frantic whispers. "Did you see this? The SEC is investigating us." What does that mean? Could the company shut down? My God, if this goes bad, do we lose our pensions? The younger staff scrolled endlessly through their phones, refreshing news feeds, reading comments, their hands trembling. A few laughed nervously, pretending it wasn't serious, but their eyes betrayed them. Even the seasoned managers, those who had always walked with confidence, looked shaken, their footsteps quicker, their conversations clipped. The storm had come, and I sat at my desk, quiet and still, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I saw them gather. Daniel Price, Clara Mitchell, other executives whose names carried weight. Their faces pale, their movements sharp, restless. The door shut firmly, but sound carries even through glass. Raised voices, shouts muffled but unmistakable. The same men and women who once thought themselves untouchable, now snapping, pointing fingers, searching for someone to blame. I leaned back in my chair, letting the noise wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe. The storm wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was theirs. Hours passed, and the boardroom remained sealed. When the door finally opened, Daniel emerged first. His tie hung loose, his face lined with anger. Clara followed, her careful smile cracked, her eyes sharper than glass. I could feel it in the way they moved, the way their gazes swept across the office. They needed to find me, and they did. That afternoon, Clara appeared at my desk, her heels striking the floor like warning bells. She leaned closer than usual, her voice a controlled whisper. "Evelyn, Daniel and I would like a word with you. Privately." The eyes of the office followed us as I rose. Some filled with pity, others with curiosity. None of them knew the truth. The small side office was quiet, the blinds drawn, the air heavy. Daniel stood by the window, staring out at the city. When he turned, his smile was forced, stretched too tight. "Evelyn," he began smoothly, though his voice carried strain. "It seems we've had some misunderstandings. Perhaps we ended things too abruptly with you. Maybe we could come to an arrangement." I stayed silent. Clara stepped forward, her tone softer, coaxing. "You've been loyal for so many years. Surely you don't want to see this company destroyed. We can fix this. A settlement? Generous. Your retirement reinstated. All you need to do is cooperate." The word hung in the air like poison. I lifted my eyes to meet hers. For the first time, I saw what lay beneath her polished mask. Fear. Real fear. I let the silence stretch until it grew unbearable. Then I spoke, my voice low but steady. "I have nothing to say to people who betrayed me." Daniel's jaw tightened. The smile slipped. His eyes darkened. "You're making a mistake, Evelyn," he hissed. I rose, slow and deliberate. My hands calm, my heart strong. "No," I said softly. "The mistake was yours. You tried to erase me 3 days before my retirement, but you forgot one thing. Numbers don't lie. They never stay buried. Not forever." Their silence followed me as I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound louder than thunder. Back at my desk, Rebecca's eyes widened. "Evelyn, what's happening? Everyone's saying the SEC is coming here next." I gave her a small smile. "Don't worry, Rebecca. The truth has a way of coming out. Always." By evening, the story had spread beyond our walls. Reporters crowded outside the building, cameras flashing as executives slipped through back doors to avoid questions. The media speculated about fraud, hidden accounts, betrayals at the highest level. Words like criminal charges and prosecution echoed through every channel. Inside the office, fear consumed everyone. People whispered about their resumes, about jumping ship before it was too late. Some wept quietly in the bathroom stalls. Others stormed out early, slamming drawers, refusing to return. I walked among them calm, invisible, untouched. They didn't know. They couldn't guess. That night, as I left the office, rain began to fall. Heavy clouds rolled across the sky, thunder low in the distance. I stepped onto the sidewalk, lifting my face to the storm. The water ran cold across my skin, soaking through my coat. But I didn't flinch. Because this storm wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Daniel, to Clara, to Sterling and Cole. They had built their empire on lies, and now the flood was washing it all away. I walked into the night, the city lights blurred by rain, my steps steady. Behind me, Sterling and Cole trembled. Ahead of me, the road stretched into darkness, but also into justice. The storm had broken, and I was ready for everything that would follow. By day, I wore my mask. By night, I sharpened my resolve. Meanwhile, in their own world, Daniel and Clara plotted. I wasn't there in the boardroom, but I can imagine it so clearly. Daniel pacing back and forth, his shoes tapping against the polished floor, his voice sharp with irritation. "She's still here. Why is she still here? We cut her loose. She should have disappeared by now. Clara, ever composed, sipping her coffee as if nothing could rattle her. She's harmless, Daniel. She refused to sign, but it doesn't matter. In 3 days, she'll be gone. It's already done. Daniel's jaw tightening, his voice rising. You don't understand. People like her don't just vanish. She's been here too long. She knows too much. Clara leaned back, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She's 62. She's exhausted. What could she possibly do? And Daniel, lowering his voice, a shadow creeping into his tone. Then let's make sure she does nothing. Let's close the door on her. For good. The words may have never reached my ears, but I could feel them in the way he looked at me across the office, the way his smile grew tighter each time I walked past. He was suspicious, not certain yet, but uneasy, and Clara, though calmer, carried the same flicker of calculation in her eyes whenever they landed on me. The irony was bitter. They were scheming, plotting, whispering about how to remove me completely, all while the real danger crept toward them from a place they couldn't see. The SEC worked quietly, methodically. They didn't storm the gates. Not yet. They slipped into the background, requesting documents, interviewing minor employees, comparing numbers line by line. And each day I walked into that office, I carried the secret that their time was running out. It was a strange kind of torture, to sit at my desk, to hear the chatter of my colleagues, to watch Daniel laugh loudly in meetings, to see Clara walk confidently through the halls, knowing that soon their world would collapse. I longed to shout it, to throw the truth into their faces, but I stayed silent. The silent battle required patience. It required restraint. So I smiled. I nodded. I played the role of the defeated employee, the old woman who had lost everything. And all the while, I whispered to myself, let them laugh. Let them plot. Let them think I am nothing. The storm is already coming. Some nights, when the weight became too heavy, I would call Linda. She didn't know the details. I couldn't risk it, but she heard the fatigue in my voice. Mom, you sound so tired. Why don't you let it go? Retire quietly. Come stay with me for a while. Her voice was warm, soft, filled with love, and I wanted so badly to say yes, to walk away, to rest. But then I would glance at the folder still sitting on my desk, the folder filled with decades of lies, and I would answer her gently, not yet, Linda, not yet, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every employee who had worked themselves to exhaustion for Sterling and Cole. It was about every promise broken, every loyalty betrayed. I had become the keeper of their sins, and I would not let those sins remain hidden. So the days dragged on, quiet on the outside, raging on the inside. I moved like a shadow through the office, invisible to most, ignored by many. But inside, I was stronger than I had ever been. Fear and faith battled every hour, every minute. But slowly, faith began to win, because I knew, sooner or later, silence would break. And when it did, Daniel and Clara would learn the truth. The old woman they thought powerless had already lit the fuse, and the explosion was coming. Justice is never free. It always comes with a price. The investigation into Sterling and Cole reached its peak. For months, the SEC dismantled every wall the company had built to hide its lies. They dug through emails, phone records, offshore accounts. They interviewed witnesses, traced shell companies, followed money that had been buried deep beneath layers of deceit. And when the truth emerged, it was devastating. Sterling and Cole had manipulated their books for years. They disguised bad debts as healthy assets. They shifted losses into fake subsidiaries. They crafted reports so polished that even investors believed them. Billions had been hidden, millions stolen. At the heart of it stood Daniel Price and Clara Mitchell. The morning the indictments were announced, I sat in my living room, the television flickering in front of me. The anchor's voice was steady, cold, merciless. Today, federal prosecutors have charged multiple executives of Sterling and Cole Finance with securities fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Named among the defendants are Daniel Price, head of operations, and Clara Mitchell, director of human resources. Both face decades in prison if convicted. Their faces appeared on the screen. Once so composed, so confident, now pale, tired, stripped of the arrogance they wore like armor. I thought of that day in the small office when they had tried to bargain with me, when Daniel's voice dripped with false charm and Clara's eyes begged me to cooperate. I thought of how calm I had been when I refused. And now, here they were, exposed to the world. But even in victory, I knew justice demands its price. Daniel paid his price in shackles. He was led out of his home at dawn, handcuffed in front of flashing cameras, his wife crying on the doorstep, his teenage son watching from behind a window. The man who once strutted through the office like a king now shuffled past reporters, his head bowed. Clara paid hers in humiliation. She had built her life on appearances, poise, control, elegance. And yet, when she stood in the courtroom, her hands trembling as the charges were read, the mask shattered. Her family sat behind her, silent, ashamed. Her reputation, her carefully constructed dignity, gone in an instant. But their families paid as well. Wives, husbands, children, people who had believed in them, trusted them, now bore the shame of their crimes. Their children would grow up carrying the weight of their parents' sins. That was a price no prison term could measure. The employees of Sterling and Cole paid their price too. Some lost their jobs overnight when the company collapsed under the weight of scandal. Men and women who had spent years there, who had believed in its name, suddenly stood in unemployment lines. Pensions were frozen. Savings vanished. They had not committed the crimes, but they bore the consequences. I saw their faces, tired, betrayed, broken. And then there was me. I had won. The SEC recognized me as the whistleblower. I received a large share of the recovered funds, and the company paid a settlement for my wrongful termination. More money than I had ever imagined. Enough to retire in comfort. Enough to give Linda security for the rest of her life. On paper, I was victorious. But victory is never simple, because I too had paid my price. I paid in years stolen from me. Birthdays I had missed, dinners I had skipped, nights I had worked while my daughter cried herself to sleep. I paid in health worn down by stress, in loneliness that filled my home when my work consumed everything else. I paid in silence, decades of holding my tongue, carrying secrets I could never share. Even in victory there was grief. I had lost the chance to leave Sterling and Cole with dignity, celebrated by colleagues, remembered with gratitude. That ending had been stolen from me forever. What I carried instead was the memory of betrayal, the sharp taste of bitterness that no settlement could erase. And yet, the greatest price I paid was trust. I no longer trusted the promises of companies, the polished words of managers, the smiles of people like Daniel and Clara. I had given them 35 years of loyalty, and they had repaid me with treachery. That wound would never fully heal. But still, I endured. Because some prices are worth paying. I remember the day the settlement check arrived. Linda sat with me at the table, her eyes wide as she read the numbers. "Mom, this is incredible. You're free. You'll never have to worry again." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm free." But my voice was heavy. She looked at me carefully. "You don't sound happy." I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "Happiness doesn't come from money, Linda. It comes from peace, and peace takes longer to find." She nodded slowly, her eyes soft with understanding. Daniel and Clara faced their trials, and the courts stripped them of everything: freedom, reputation, future. The company's name was dragged through headlines until nothing remained but ashes. Employees scattered to rebuild their lives elsewhere. Shareholders counted their losses, cursing the very brand they once praised. That was the price of Sterling and Cole's lies. And me? I carried my scars like invisible ink. The world saw a whistleblower, a survivor, even a hero. But beneath it all, I was still a woman who had given her life to a company that used her and threw her away. That was the price I had to live with. But perhaps it was also the proof of who I truly was. Not erased, not forgotten, not destroyed. I had endured the cost, and I was still standing. Justice had been delivered, and though it demanded everything, I had given everything. The storm had passed, not quickly, not cleanly, but it had passed. The company that once defined my life was gone. The people who betrayed me were behind bars or stripped of their power. The lies were dragged into the light, exposed for the world to see. And I was still here. For months after the verdict, the world seemed to slow. Reporters tried to reach me. Cameras waited outside my home. Strangers sent letters calling me brave. But I was not looking for fame. I was looking for peace. I would sit by the window of my home with a cup of tea, watching the seasons change, letting the quiet wrap around me. Sometimes the silence felt heavy, almost unbearable. Other times it felt like freedom. Because for the first time in decades, I was not bound to Sterling and Cole. I was not their machine anymore. I was my own. The settlement secured my future, yes. But more than money, I gained something deeper. My voice. For years, I had silenced myself, swallowing the truth to protect a company that cared nothing for me. Now I spoke freely, and people listened. It began with a single letter. A woman from Chicago, a former nurse at a hospital chain, wrote to me, "Evelyn, I read your story in the news. I thought I was alone, but you showed me I'm not. Because of you, I am ready to speak up." I cried when I read those words. Then came more. Letters from teachers who had seen corruption in their districts, from bankers pressured to hide numbers, from ordinary workers who had been threatened into silence. They all said the same thing. You gave me courage. I never expected to be anyone's inspiration. I never set out to be a hero. I was just a woman trying to hold on to her dignity. But somehow, my choice had lit a spark in others. That was my rebirth. No longer a discarded employee, no longer a victim. I had become something different, a reminder that truth has power, even when spoken by someone others call weak. I began to speak publicly, not often, not loudly, but enough. Conferences invited me to share my story. Advocacy groups for whistleblowers asked me to meet others walking the same path. I would stand at podiums, my voice steady, my story plain. And afterward, people would come forward, tears in their eyes, thanking me. Some would whisper, "Because of you, I'm going to tell my truth too." And each time, I felt the wound inside me close just a little more. Linda, my daughter, became my anchor. She reminded me that life was still worth living beyond the numbers, beyond the betrayal. She would laugh and say, "Mom, you finally have time to live your life, for you." And she was right. I traveled. I read books I had once put aside. I planted flowers in my garden and watched them bloom, season after season. Small things, but precious. Yet, even in peace, I carried the memory of what happened. Because scars never vanish. They stay, etched beneath the skin. Reminders of both the pain and the strength it took to survive. One evening, as the sun sank beyond the horizon, I sat at my desk, the same desk where I had once stared at piles of falsified numbers. Only now it held letters from people I had never met, letters of gratitude, of courage, of hope. And I realized this was my true legacy, not the years spent in service to a company that betrayed me, not the numbers I balanced or the files I completed, but the choice I made in the face of betrayal, the choice to stand, not crumble, to speak, not stay silent. That choice would outlive me. When people remembered Sterling and Cole, they would remember the scandal, the downfall, the crimes. But when they remembered me, it would not be as the woman who was erased 3 days before retirement. It would be as the woman who refused to disappear, as the voice that proved even the smallest spark of truth can ignite a fire. And so, as I look back on everything, the betrayal, the fear, the storm, the justice, the price, I see not just the pain. I see the rebirth. I see the legacy. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had taken everything from me. But the truth is simpler. They had given me something far greater than what they stole. They had given me purpose. And purpose is stronger than betrayal. So I tell my story now, not with bitterness, but with clarity, because every word I speak carries the lesson I learned, that justice is slow, costly, merciless at times, but it finds its way, always. And so, my voiceover ends here, with the words that will define me long after Sterling and Cole is forgotten. They thought they had destroyed me, but in truth, they gave me the chance to rise, to be remembered, not as someone discarded, but as proof that justice always finds its way. Bo sa